How worried are you about Chinese espionage in the United States?
Well, I think from a perspective of threat against the United States national security and our interests, China is number one by far, and I think espionage is a part of that. But from a perspective of countering the intelligence threat of foreign nations, China is our biggest concern across a wide range of issues. Espionage is one of our larger ones.
From where you sit, do you see China as a greater threat than Russia?
Yes. I think Russia has its own skill sets with respect to threat to our national security, but it pales in comparison to the national security threat posed by China. And I would say not only here in the U.S., from an economic security perspective, from a militarization perspective, as well as globally. When you look at China and what their strategic plan is, and Xi Jinping's plan, it's to be the global superpower geopolitically, militarily, and from an economic perspective. And they will achieve that with any means necessary. That becomes a global issue, not just a U.S. issue.
And what is China trying to do then? What's it doing when it comes to stealing secrets in America?
A lot of success has been predicated upon the theft globally, and a lot of it here in the U.S., of proprietary data and trade secrets. If you just look back this year from June or July till now, the Department of Justice has indicted or charged 20 Chinese individuals or businesses for economic espionage just since July. That is a lot, and those are just the ones we know about. Those are just the ones that have been charged through the criminal court system now, but I can tell you there's more coming and there's more out there. So if you just look at that, just this moment in time, the amount of data, and then what we like to do is say, okay, that's great. We've arrested Chinese students, scientists, businessmen stealing on behalf of the Communist Party of China. Wonderful. But what we like to look at is what's the damage that's done? What is the long-term cost to the American taxpayer, to the research and development organizations, to universities, to the businesses, and how many jobs are lost with the theft of this proprietary data and trade secrets? That's the long-term impact of another country stealing our proprietary data and trade secrets.
There have been a number of cases recently, particularly on aerospace and aviation. Do you think that shows a particular interest from China in that field?
I think it does, and I think it lays out, again, perfectly to their strategic plan, the elements of what they're interested in. And I would say for any foreign intelligence service is the ability to identify and engineer a scientist or someone of value in the U.S., offer them free travel to China to do a presentation at university, and when they get there, cultivate them and identify some of the product and get them to be coerced to provide that technology, that proprietary data or trade secret to them. And I think that's tried and true, and they will continue to do that because people are vulnerable to that and don't understand the nefarious activities when they're asked to do so.
There have been reports that the Chinese use social media platforms like LinkedIn to approach people and to try and get them to spy effectively. That's
correct, and I think their use of the social media sites like LinkedIn is prolific, and their ability to do so from a targeted perspective and be able to scan and search around the globe on these sites for individuals that have a particular technology is used every day, and then they can target those. Also, if you look at it from a perspective of the intelligence service, it's a low-risk, high-yield ability to send out 30,000 emails, 40,000 emails, and get 20, 30, 40, 50 people respond and say, I had that technology, I can come over and give that presentation.
How far are universities a target, and how far are they the kind of battleground over secrets when it comes to espionage and to China?
That's a great question. Universities are a big part of this whole mosaic. And when we look at where a lot of the research and development is done throughout the world, it's in the universities and colleges and research centers that are globalized. Right, and our adversaries around the world know that, the Chinese know that, so they will put people in those positions to identify not only emerging technologies, but now technologies. I think colleges, universities, and research centers are constantly victimized by the Chinese about this. Just in the U.S., we grant probably 350,000 students from China alone access here. The majority of those are really hardworking students to learn and be better educated around in their own families and their mindsets. But it provides an amazing opportunity for the Chinese intelligence services to utilize those individuals to steal that research and development. When you look at the funding that comes with those 350,000, I think their current estimate is $45 billion a year that U.S. universities and colleges are getting from China to have their students come here. That's wonderful. It's great for the economy. But also, universities are now starting to understand, not only in the U.S. but around the globe, the activities, the nefarious activities of intelligence services oftentimes happen on college university campuses.
You're seeing it in the UK, you think, as well?
That's correct.
Chinese economic power, in terms of, is clearly growing. Companies want access to the Chinese market. Does that create any concerns over the leverages that might give China?
It certainly does. And I spend a lot of my time in the private sector talking just about this, because if you are a Western market, a Western business, a Western entity who has developed something, in order to be that successful down the road, you need to engage in the Chinese market, right? Which is a huge part of the global economy. But when you do so, you need to go there fully understanding that there are risks to that. There are laws that provide China the ability to take your data, your trade secrets, your proprietary data, your information, everything that your code for your source code that comes with anything that you're going to put there. China then owns that. And that is not reciprocal here in the US, Great Britain, or Australia. So when you look at that capability, when you go to China in the global market to invest, to be part of that economy, you have to go in there with your eyes wide open. That is a significant challenge.
Do you think companies are aware of that challenge? Because some technology companies have gone into China, some are debating going into China. There's the Google issue, whether they're going to put a search engine into China. I mean, do you think companies are aware of the risks now of what might be involved when it comes to free expression, for instance?
I would say most of them are not. I think there are companies that have specific organizational ties, have a particular product, understand that, and they go there eyes wide open. But I think it's a risk-based assessment you have to have going to China, and I think we have to do a better job in the Western civilization to say, hey, when you go to China in this market, you are going to give this up, just as much as you are aware of that. And I think that's all we can really ask for. When you talked about Google CEO, Alphabet CEO, pretty much said, hey, listen, you have to sell part of your soul when you go to China, and you have to make that part of your equation when you decide to do so.
And you think people are aware now of those risks, but not still enough?
I think we're getting there. I don't think they're there fully. And I think when you talk about the business end of things that are not national security related, it's the dream of, it's the American dream, it's the dream of Great Britain to be able to produce X and sell it globally. And I think that is the sign of a very healthy capitalist society. Our goal is to throw a layer on that of national security. What does that mean in the US, in Great Britain, in Australia, in Canada? How is that impacting our national security? My perspective is our economic security is our national security. So they all are intertwined. All we want companies and businesses to know is there is a risk factor when you go into China to operate.
And your message is think twice.
Think twice, because your data is going to be available to the Chinese government and to intelligence services for whatever they deem possible.
Does it worry you, though, that companies do seem to be willing to censor what they do to get access to the Chinese market? Because we're seeing more and more cases where people perhaps are not talking about Tibet or Taiwan or some of these issues because they want to sell their goods in China, they want to open hotels in China, they want to make films in China or sell them to China.
It's definitely a slippery slope, and I think it's problematic for me. And I look at this as, is this something we want to have going forward as a global society, where we have a major retailer here in the US have to apologize to the government of China because they left Taiwan off a map of China on their shirt? When we have a major airline have to apologize to the Chinese government because there's so many markets for the airline because of a tweet? And if you look at a major hotel brand in the US have to apologize to China because of mundane activity. I don't think that is where we want to go as a global society, when we have to apologize to countries. Again, if you look at Hollywood, China just banned Winnie the Pooh. Well, now if you look at that, if we have screenwriters now in the US and across the world in any capacity, whether it's Hollywood or in the new streaming video world, have to write their screenplays with a long-term vision of selling this in China, that's the perfect metric for success by the government of China. That we have self-censorship going on with the ability for people with a long-term idea that we're going to sell this in the global market to include China. We cannot have anything anti-China in our documentary or a movie or a screenplay. Is very problematic.
You think that's a security risk?
I think the influence part of that is a security risk. I don't think that's a national security, but again, it's part of the slippery slope where you have self-censorship in a free society to be able to work and play in the global economy or in China is very problematic to the morals, the values that we built and we live by in our democratic societies in the West.
So it's a sense in which Chinese influence is extending into self-censorship or into limiting free speech, you think?
Yes, and I think they already have an influence campaign where they censor everything on their own. But when they have a democratic country like the US or Great Britain self-censoring early on in a business process, that is a model of success for China.
Because they've exported it without even having to pressure a company or tell them what to do, you
absolutely.
think?
When you look at the last 10 years, the amount of movies that are no longer being able to be marketed in China because they either have an issue with China or the predication of the show is maybe negative and it's China-based, that's problematic. So when you have screenwriters now writing in a script, thinking about, well, I better not say this or that or do it this way because I won't be able to sell my video in China, that's an amazing success for censorship.
Do you think now in the US there is more awareness of this? Because it's certainly been the case in the last 6 months. We've seen a lot of indictments, a lot of activity. Is there a coordinated campaign going on from this administration to put pressure on China?
This is not an anti-China issue. This is a protect America, protect the free world from all these nefarious activities and the economic aggression by China, not only here in the US, but around the globe.
Evanina, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here.